Okay, so this is chapter 13, which is the chapter that deals with technology in organizational communication. And we'll explore a couple of different aspects of technology and their impacts or ramifications and different ways to look at them within the whole entire realm of organizational life. So to begin with, we're going to explore the notion of the different types of technology. And here's a simple table that illustrates some of those concepts. Obviously, many of these were not around when your grandparents were in organizations, but they certainly are today. In terms of email, it has had a profound effect on both personal life and organizational life. Um, you know, even the World Wide Web, in terms of faster message transmissions, it allows more communication amongst, geographically dispersed people. And asynchronous communication. Asynchronous means that one person can basically send a message and it can be received a few hours later, not necessarily at the same time. So you'll have some of the issues listed here, and there are advantages and disadvantages. GDSS is a computer system that works a lot to deal with documentation and more or less evidence and a lot of research and things like that. The information is used in that aspect. Okay, looking at some of the different theories on technology and organizational communication, there are several. Your book focuses in on the information social processing model, which we'll get to in a second, and then sort of gives an overview of some additional. But a lot of the theories, essentially what these theories are doing is they're trying to illustrate the factors that'll predict how much media or technology will be used. And that has to do with what we call critical mass. Many times a technology is introduced and it's just simply not widely adopted or accepted, whether that's because of a lot of laggards in the industry, people are real slow to adopt it, or whether there are issues. But there are different theories that have to do with adoption and how a technology is adopted socially. So let's dive in and look at the social information processing model. This model, developed by Folk, argues that if you look at the social environment of the people involved, that'll help explain how a particular technology might be adopted or it might not be adopted. So when I talk about the social environment, I'm talking about looking at the communication between the coworkers. So sort of a lateral communication, or we can look at vertical communication between supervisors and subordinates, or between employees and customers, and how that affects. So that's the social information processing model, definitely tied into communication. Now there are several other models that deal with media usage. Channel expansion theory, this has to do with the perception of richness or the value of the media, and that can have a lot to do with an individual's personal experience. And there's a lot of variables that can influence the perception that somebody has in terms of its richness or its value, based on a variety of different things: personal experience, what they've heard, relational factors, personality, so on and so forth. Dual capacity, what that is arguing is that every organizational medium, every organizational technology has the capacity to carry data and to basically carry symbols. And the choice of choosing that particular channel depends on both of those factors, the data and the symbolism involved. So it's an interesting approach. Media synchronicity has to do with the extent to which the medium or the technology supports synchronicity. The idea that you can have an asynchronous communication, the fact that I can communicate, you can communicate, we can have a conversation, but this conversation is going to take place over a couple of days because we're going to go back and forth, and I can lay out a message and you can chew on that, think about it, and then come up with a rebuttal or add to it. And when I get a chance, I'll take a look at that argument. It's not that we both have to be at the same time in the same, variable. So synchronicity, asynchronicity is definitely examined within this particular idea of media synchronicity theory. Okay, so that's looking at some of the theories and the models. Now let's talk about some of the effects. And there has been research about media effects, technology effects for years, and this goes well beyond the small limitation or realm that we're looking at within organizations. It's been debated. People have been arguing the effects of different types of technology and media on everything from children to antisocial behavior to economic costs, government, and so the debate is very big, bottom line. Okay, one particular perspective is the technology does not determine the outcome. It's sort of the idea in gun control that the gun does not kill the person, but it's the people who use that particular technology. And that the effects of the communication depends on how it's used and who is using it. And sometimes you just simply cannot get a clear grasp on technology and the effects of technology immediately. Many times it takes years for these to come to the surface, to percolate, and often they are not what we expect. Now, the effects research on technology focuses in 3 different areas, focusing on content, on patterns, and on structure. So let's first look at content. Now, this is where you're actually looking at the communication that occurs within this particular organizational technology. Many organizational technologies will filter out cues, and the most obvious of cue that is filtered out is the nonverbal. Certainly tonality in a person's voice. It's one thing to say, oh yeah, and it's another thing to say, oh yeah. And they're entirely different messages, but basically they're the same content. And so we've done a lot to sort of try to circumvent that, to try to limit that with the use of emoticons and so on and so forth. And we've tried to compensate. Distance and anonymity does lead to less inhibition, and that can be great in the sense that everyone participates. That's one of the things I enjoy about teaching online, is many of my students that are very quiet and reticent in my face-to-face class have great things to share, but they only feel comfortable doing that in the online environment. On the other side, this lack of inhibition can lead to cyberbullying and what's called flaming. And probably one of the simplest ways to look at this is go read some of the contents that are on a YouTube video. It is amazing how free people are with insults in sort of that online environment. So that's content. Some of the research explores this notion of patterns, and here we talk about there are new technologies that augment existing technologies. They sort of support what we already have and make it beneficial. That organizations that adopt new communication technologies, the downside is that it radically increases the amount of communication that occurs and leads people to a perception that they are drowning in data. There's so much. And certainly electronic message systems increase the prevalence of upward communication. You're able to shoot an email off to the vice president more easily than you would in other circumstances when that vice president might have an office in another building you cannot access. There's electronic messages, like I said, increased prevalence of upward. The contexts are more diverse. Communication technology can lead to greater equality, the ground is level, and increased prominence of knowledge. On social networking sites, there are positive sides of that and negative sides, and there are a lot of increasing concerns about privacy as a result of this. So that's some of the information on patterns. Looking at structure, a couple of different things here. Technology influences very much the way we work and the overall design of organization. Your book talks about the different types of work distribution patterns. Traditionally, there's been a central office, and that's where everybody came to. Then there's telework, where you sort of could take work home. And then there's flex time, which just simply allowed you to vary the amount of time spent in a particular place and how you got something done. Well, now a lot of the research is on this whole notion of a virtual organization and the idea of virtual work. And certainly that has a profound effect on organizations. Virtual work can involve working at home. It can be anywhere. There are virtual teams that can have members in this particular group that are geographically dispersed. There are a lot of advantages to this. Some of the advantages include reduced expenses, there's less overhead, you have greater access to global markets. There are environmental benefits, increased productivity, enhanced profits, and so on. But there are challenges. The downsides, there's a lot of setup. There's a lot of maintenance because technology is out of date the minute you turn it on. There are for some people, loss of cost efficiency. A lot of that may have to do with the amount of tangents. How many times have you sat down to knock something out on Blackboard, but one link led to another link, and that made you think of your Facebook, and then off you were on Pinterest because you found something great to post, and so on and so forth. Another disadvantage is you can feel isolated. Certainly in an online classroom, I think that's an easy thing to feel. The paradoxes of telework and virtual organization. There are 3 clear paradoxes that are in the writings by Perlson and Saunders. For the sake of time, I'm going to ask that you go to the book and explore those. Okay, so that's it for now in terms of Chapter 13 and looking at technology. So I wish you well. Have a great week.